man, I'm having problems saying statistics now. Statistics. You would think that in a statistics video I could say the word statistics. Hello, my beautiful bookish people. In this video, I want to talk about my 2020 reading stats, which is the first year I've ever taken reading stats for myself. Because in 2019, my goal with reading was just to start. I had been completely burned out from reading thanks to my academic workload and some bad experiences in the library, and I just wanted to try to enjoy reading again. And I did not bother keeping a statistics spreadsheet, though I did finally discover Goodreads and started to track the books I was reading there. And then last year, so about halfway through 2020, I realized after watching some other Booktube videos that it might be a fun idea to start taking my stats for what I was reading, because that could potentially be like an outlet for fun for me, because I'm a nerd and sometimes I like looking at numbers, and it could also potentially be useful. So last year I decided I would start keeping track of some things based roughly off of a spreadsheet that I saw linked in another video, which I can't find now, but I will leave a link to the original spreadsheet that this is ultimately based off of for what I modified for mine. And I had no specific goals other than just to take down some stats for what I was reading. This year, however, that might change a little. I'm not really sure yet, but we'll get into that as I go through and talk about the different stats that I collected. My first category is books by type, which I broke down into rereads, standalones, and series. Evidently, I really like series, since that category is almost 60% of what I read, and I'm curious moving forward to see how many books I end up rereading, since only 9% of my books in 2020 were rereads. For clarity, only books that I have not read before are allowed to be put into the series and standalone categories, and at some point I might add arcs into this section, but I'm not really sure when that will happen, because I still feel like I'm playing catch up on all of the other books in existence, and I haven't really gotten myself onto any arc lists, so in the event that happens, I'll probably add it here, but until then, those are the categories that I have. Next, we have books by intended audience. As you see, these categories are adult, YA, middle grade, and children. Unsurprisingly, the vast majority of my reads come from adult and YA, but what I found really interesting is that YA edges out over adult for me, just barely. Occasionally, I'll dip my toes back into middle grade, and even less so for children's. None of this was by design, it's just kinda what happened, like I said earlier. Something that I never understood is the stigma I grew up with in my household that you should only read books in your recommended age group or slightly higher. Just out of curiosity, what mindset do you have when you go into reading? Let me know in the comment sections, because as you can see, I just end up reading whatever I feel like. I'm very much a mood reader, and I still find enjoyment in middle grade and children's from time to time. Especially right now, as I'm filming this in February, I've been reading a good bit of middle grade in February. The next category is books by author racial diversity. I tried my best to research the authors through Goodreads, Twitter, or their author websites. Also, there were more racial categories on the spreadsheet. I just didn't end up reading anything from those categories. So that's why the pie graph looks like this. At this point in my life, I'm not really sure how to interpret these results. Things I would like to look into is, what does the author market for English-based books currently look like? And what does the market look like when we look specifically at sci-fi and fantasy genres, since that's typically what I find myself enjoying? And just as a general question, should I, as a reader who is now starting to pay attention to their reading statistics, put a little bit more work and effort into making sure that I'm reading from underrepresented groups so that publishers will notice and make a greater effort to diversify their author pools? Is author pools even a thing? I, I don't know what to call it. When I am purposefully reading diversely, am I also making sure that I'm not doing so out of tokenism? Because that's something I definitely want to avoid. And I have many, many questions that I am asking myself right now as I'm looking at these particular set of data points. And I'm super interested to hear what your thoughts are on these in the comments. Also, for anyone wanting to look into the differences between diversity and tokenism, I'll leave a link to the channel T1J, also known as the One Janitor. And if you have any other suggestions on this topic, please link those in the comments as well. Or actually, I think YouTube's been having issues with when people try to comment direct links to other videos, so maybe just tell me the channel name and the title of the video. Next up is books by content diversity. My statistics do not necessarily match with how I think other people may classify things. Excuse me. For instance, some books that may have come from the diversity section of the library may have gone into my none category, because within the book itself, it did not necessarily contain any other groups. For instance, with racial diversity, it may have only featured one race, so I did not stick it in my racial diversity category. That's why these statistics are staying private for now until I figure out how to share them for people who are wanting book recommendations. Like, I know by going through my stats, if somebody asks me, hey, I'm looking for something on this specifically, I keep enough info in my stats so that if they're looking for something that I'll remember, it will jog my memory and I'll be able to make that as a reference. But until I figure out how to keep notes both for myself and the public, I don't feel comfortable doing that. On the other end of this spectrum of me just trying to figure out where to put things, anything that would fall under LGBTQIA+ would fall under queer for my categorization purposes, because that is the word that I use to describe myself and just how I naturally think of this in my brain. And then my category of multiple can contain multiple of all these things. So, yeah, that's, it's hard for me to categorize stuff sometimes. I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm just really glad in general I tend to naturally gravitate seemingly towards more diverse books, but I think I want to up my disability game for this year. So please leave me all of your favorite disabled rep book suggestions in the comments, especially since having found myself newly part of the disabled community, or maybe accepting myself as disabled finally, because I technically have been my whole life because it's a genetic condition. Okay, that's a different soapbox to get on. But anyways, I really want to expand my horizons here, so please leave me your book suggestions in the comments. Next is books by genre. I'm not remotely surprised that my main genre is fantasy. I can't put into words why I enjoy this genre so much, but I just do, and I always have. I also found out this year that I absolutely love graphic novels and manga. That's a category I never really had access to as a child that I am absolutely falling in love with in my adult life. In fact, this format has gotten me interested in classics, because if you're like me and you're frustrated with the fact that you just seem like you're not able to tuck into a classic, I'd highly recommend you check out the manga or graphic novel adaptation, because it might help you get into books that otherwise you might pass up. You may also find that you like the adaptation so much that you then go back to the original content and enjoy it much more. And at some point in 2020, I started picking up a couple of contemporary novels as suggestions of a couple of friends, and I'm really glad that they gave me those recommendations, because as a kid I never really enjoyed biographies, but things that get classified as a mix between contemporary and memoir, I have found myself really enjoying. I also love to read a good spooky read from time to time. It has to be when I'm in the mood for it, though. And actually, as I said before, I'm very much a mood reader, so you never know what I'm going to reach for and enjoy at every given time. Sometimes it's very frustrating. Next up is books by Medium. This really ended up surprising me. I didn't think that I would read almost equal thirds of audio, ebook, and physical copies, but that's just how it so happened to have turned out. When my hands, shoulders, and arms really started to bother me last year, I started gravitating more towards ebooks since they're much more convenient for me to read. And in fact, if you haven't already seen my Reading Medium's book tag, I'd highly recommend you check that out. And I'd love to see more people participate in that particular discussion, which, again, I will link in the description. And please let me know if you decide to join in. Next, we have my personal ratings for the year. You won't necessarily find all of this data on my Goodreads because I don't necessarily want to provide a star rating on a public platform that people use to decide whether or not they'll end up picking up that book, especially if I'm not anywhere close to being part of the intended audience for that book. Generally, if I'm not going to give something a high rating that is outside of sci-fi and fantasy, it stays on my personal tracker. Also, for reference, my star rating is based off of how often I think I would reread a book, or just in general how thoroughly I enjoyed the story, because those two things are basically intertwined for me. So 5 stars is a book I can see myself rereading constantly. 4 stars would be a slightly less often reread. 3 stars are I definitely enjoyed it, but I probably don't see myself rereading it. 2 is I'm definitely not enjoying the majority of it, and 1 is when I'm actively hating that I'm reading what I'm reading. And a DNF is either for books that I just can't get into at the moment and revisit later, or it's a book I just don't enjoy reading, so I stop partway through because it's probably going to get a 1 or 2 star for me. I think for this year I would like to add in May Return To as a category on its own, maybe? Because sometimes I end up DNFing things while I'm not in the mood for it and then pick it up later. Overall, I had a pretty fun time reading in 2020, and if you'd like to hear about the books I only gave 1 star to, help get this video to 100 likes, or just go check out my blog posts about it, which I will also link in the description. And if this video does so happen to get 100 likes, I'll make those blog posts and turn them into a video on this channel. And finally, we have the category Author by Gender Identity. To clear some terminology up, anything that fell under co-authored category had more than one author. I did not delineate genders on that one. I might change that in my 2021 stats so that it reflects whether or not authors from different gender identities work on a single book. I haven't really gotten that far ahead of myself yet. Again, I tried my best to sleuth out this info using the internet, but if there was anyone I was unsure of the status, they were labeled as unknown because I wasn't sure how they identified. I'm pleasantly surprised that a lot of the books I picked up were from people who openly identified as female, especially since the Equal Rights Amendment was fairly recently passed in the United States in 1972. and honestly still has a long way to go implementation-wise, but that's a different soapbox. This year, I think I'd like to improve my consumption of non-binary voices, so please leave me recommendations for those in the comments. And if you'd like to know more about the differences between diversity and tokenism, again, please check out the video linked in the description that I talked about earlier. I'd also like to know your thoughts on if I should make a category on my spreadsheet specifically for trans voices. In 2020, I didn't delineate these things since I thought it was more respectful to allow people to self-identify. However, I can totally see the potential for readers wanting to consume more trans voice content and making use of those statistics. So please do let me know. Those are all the statistics I collected. Man, I'm having problems saying statistics now. Statistics. You would think that in a statistics video I could say the word statistics. Anyways, are there more things you would like to see me do in 2021? And as a reader, what are some of those things that you look for in statistics? And would you like to see more of these come out in my book reviews? Like maybe a once-a-month check-in with reading statistics at the end of the month, along with any book reviews that I haven't done separately. Let me know about that in the comments as well, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!